morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. We're from Kyndryl, and so we'll introduce ourselves in a second, but I want to talk a little bit about what Kyndryl is. So a little over 2 years ago, we were set free from IBM. We used to be their global technology services, and that freedom has allowed us to work with all of the vendors, including AWS and all the wonderful booths that you see around reInvent, and integrate those. So we offer consulting services and we offer managed services. We can do it end-to-end across 6 global practices, and we have complete flexibility now that we have that independence. And so we're really excited, but our strength is also our history, that we have 30 years of experience in the security business that we're going to talk to you about today when we were with IBM. And so the strength is really the people. And I think you've got a unique combination today. So my name is Dan Riley. I'm an actuary by training. So if you want to know when your next car accident's going to be or when you're going to die, I'm your guy. You can take the actuary out of the insurance company, but you can't take the insurance company out of the actuary. So you can bundle those and save if you want both. And then joining me this morning is William DeForest. He's a retired major in the US Air Force and actually taught cybersecurity to officers in the Air Force. And so I don't know where else you're going to find an officer and an actuary together to talk about cybersecurity. So with that, I'm going to turn it to William to kick us off.
Thanks, Dan. So I happen to be here this morning, William DeForest. Just before I kind of get into the next slide and kind of just painting the picture of a landscape, I've been at Kyndryl for about 18 months, and I come from MSSP space, and just happy to be here at Kyndryl in order to build a security practice, if you will. Some of the components from the ground up, some of the components that were existing already in the recovery space. But I think the most exciting thing is being able to be in one organization that kind of has the left and the right of the boom. So we're securing that infrastructure and we're managing that infrastructure. If that was one of the main takeaways in order to kind of get from this, is that's the excitement and what we're kind of really experiencing and having the partnership with AWS. So over the past 2 to 3 days, I've really had a chance to meet with vendors, partners, alliances, and also clients. And so while there's some percentages, these probably aren't anything that you've seen before, but I will let you know that it is still resonating with kind of the demand for a strategy, a demand for a framework for you to kind of keep up with the emerging threats. Absolutely, it is not going to stop. In fact, it absolutely could increase. So in the presentation, you're going to kind of see some domains, some areas that we have in our portfolio to kind of take that same type of attack to say, is there a different way of doing business? Is there another way for us to kind of attack this problem that is going to continue? So I'll kind of pick a thread on some of those areas, but here in a couple minutes, we're going to kind of go through the 4 areas of our portfolio, show you what that approach looks like, and see how that'll apply. I think before I kind of go to the next slide, there was a very important discussion that I had yesterday morning, and you kind of think, okay, it's 2023, and do we still, based on all the technologies, based on all the approaches, and based on all the collaborations, do we still have this? I need to feel more confident with what my strategy is. Am I optimizing the people or the tools that I have in my portfolio? You kind of think we're all here in this consortium over the last couple of days, and we're like, haven't we sort of kind of got this all down? Here to tell you? No. So there are still CISOs, senior security leaders, that are still wanting to be a little bit more confident with what do I have in play right now? And do I feel that I'm looking at the right types of things in order for me to do security and resiliency in my organization? So some of the client challenges that we have sort of pulled forward, I don't think that any of them are really going to be super surprising, but you'll see the alignment. I think the very first one is the accelerated threat insights. So they are coming faster, especially when we talk with Dan with AI, when we talk about quantum security, when we talk about the other types that are coming at us much faster, we've got to keep up. So that's one of the client challenges that we absolutely see, and how are we doing our security business. Then the next one is global compliance for cyber resilience. Again, as we've been releasing offerings, there is a different requirement as you kind of deploy the the offerings through the globe. And so we need to be able to meet those requirements. So while we can have everyone kind of have one offering that meets that demand, there's going to be some clear requirements. And so as we're building Kyndryl, when we're building our offerings from the ground up, we absolutely take that into consideration at the beginning. So it's built into our offerings, it's built into our considerations before we even get to that point. So taking that into pair. Secure modernization. Modernization, don't get too hung up on that word. Basically what we're saying is, how are we using our resources? It's our people, our technology, and our processes. How are we doing that? Is there a different way of doing business? Do I get a return on my investment? Am I making use of my investment? Again, the last 10, 15 years was literally a checkbox saying, listen, I just need to get something in. I need to get more insights. I need to get more information for me to try to get a hold of my risk. Modernization is going to keep going, but now, again, with AWS, advent of data lakes, data analytics, being able to look at that, it's another way of doing that. And so that's why we're partnering with AWS in their strategy. You'll see that here a little bit. And the last one, integrated security and resiliency, is in our roadmap, in our portfolio. In the next slide, you kind of see that we take that from security assurance, zero trust, security operations into recovery and resiliency. We don't separate that. It has to be the same conversation in order to do both of those pieces. Okay, this is where I hope I don't get long-winded. So where you start to see our full resiliency framework, and that's what we call it. You see 4 towers. This is our approach, and this is how we break it down. And the reason this is important because there needs to be an additional discussion on it's not just incident response, it's not just looking at the alerts, the security strategy in order for us to keep up with emerging threats. It's way more than that. Like Dan said at the beginning, in all of our offerings, when we build a managed service offering, we also have an advisory and implementation offering as well. So there's a discussion across the landscape that's required. So every one of those that you see, all those pillars that you see, has that corresponding advisory and implementation offering. Again, like the conversation that I had yesterday with a client, it's I need help, I need confidence. Can you come help me figure out what am I doing today and what does my next roadmap need to look like in the next 24 months? So kind of just breaking these down, we're going to go through these in a little bit more detail from left to right, but stay focused on the anticipate, protect, withstand, and recover. We'll break these down a little bit. But very, very excited about this slide and kind of our security and resiliency practice. I think before we leave this, you'll see that wheel that's there as well. So the S&R practice interfaces with other core competencies that you would expect for our organization to be in tune with and partnering with. So cloud, networking and edge, AD and AI. Just, again, because my portfolio or our portfolio in security operations and response really been spending a lot of time with the AD and AI practice right now with how we're leveraging data lake, security data lake, and leveraging the insights that we get from OCSF technologies.
Thank you, William. So now we're going to shift into the first of those phases that William talked about with anticipate, and specifically anticipating evolving threats that are coming and will continue to evolve over time. And some context there, this is one example in the world of something that's happening everywhere, and that is there's increased government focus on risk and the impact that cybersecurity has on business. As an example, the SEC earlier this year created new rules around how quickly you need to disclose a breach that may have, you can see here, a material impact on your shareholders. And so this slide, certainly don't want you to read all this, but if you'll notice kind of the spruce at the top and the red at the bottom, materiality and risk is over and over and over in this slide. And so to me, again, as an actuary, how do you express materiality if you can't quantify your risk? And so that's something that I want to evangelize a little bit as we move on to the next slide here. that there is an open framework called FAIR, the Factor Analysis of Information Risk. And this is a framework that is promoted by a group called the FAIR Institute, and there are open standards that are done through the open group, and they work in partnership. This is something that anybody can participate in that helps you quantify your risk. And what that does for a cybersecurity professional is it allows you to say, here's my inherent risk, and it may be $10 million. And I need to get budget to address that risk. I can put a control in place, and that costs $1 million. And so now you have a business case that says I can spend $1 million to reduce my risk by $10 million. That's a much easier conversation. It also makes cyber risk compatible with enterprise risk. You can go to your board and combine those and see a true portfolio of risk within your corporation, not where the enterprise guys are talking in millions of dollars and you're talking in red, amber, green, or low, medium, and high, or whatever case. A question I've never figured out how to answer is, how many lows make a medium? I have no idea, but I know how many millions make a billion and those kinds of things. And so this is something I really want to evangelize for. It's also a little bit different terminology. It makes you think about it differently. The traditional risk management, we oftentimes will talk about a likelihood and an impact. And with FAIR, you think about that a little bit differently. You've got a loss event frequency, so how often will a breach occur, and there will actually be loss that happens, and then a loss magnitude, and that's what makes up your risk. And so it's all about loss. It makes you think about things in financial terms. It's a much more business-oriented way to think about cyber, and so I want to evangelize for that a little bit. And now I'm going to talk about a couple of emerging threat vectors in the context of FAIR. And I want to talk about, so I was teasing William last night that I really want this session to be edutainment. And so I purposely worked in some humor here. And so we're going to talk about generative AI first. And we're in Vegas. So if you had a prop bet that the Shiba Inus were going to show up during one of the sessions, you can go collect on your prop bet after the show. It probably pays pretty well in terms of the odds on that. But I thought this really fit well. So generative AI, there's lots of components to it, and it's going to evolve over time. I think from a positive perspective, there's a ton of potential here in terms of productivity, in terms of making individual cybersecurity professionals more efficient. They can handle larger scope, those kinds of things. The downside in the short term, there's an internal one and an external one. The internal one is more accidental insiders, where, for example, they may take confidential data and load it into a public model. We've seen that happen out in the industry. So that's a serious thing that companies need to figure out how to address that through education, through controls. There's technical ways to make sure that when you're doing prompt engineering, it filters out things like that, like PII and confidential information. And then the other one, which is really what the two Shiba Inus are talking about, is the most immediate threat to me with generative AI is what we know as script kiddies. The teenagers or college kids in their mom's basement who hack for fun. They now have the ability to be much more efficient because they can ask the public large language models, how do I hack this particular vulnerability? And they'll get a list. Here's step 1, step 2, step 3. And so all of a sudden, someone with essentially no skill in this area will behave like someone who's a skilled threat actor. And that's a fundamental change. Over time, I think we're going to see more serious threats where you'll have state-sponsored things and organized crime and those kind of things really take advantage of some of the same capabilities that are on the positive side where they can be more productive and that not, but productive for them is bad for us. And so the one thing I would strongly recommend is, do it the right way, but start investigating this. Don't be afraid of the technology. The bad guys are using it. They will continue to use it. They'll get better at it. So we need to take advantage of the technology as well to defend ourselves, to understand how the bad guys will use it and prepare for that. And so it's, as with everything, there's pluses and minuses. And that's true of the next one as well. So we're going to flip over from generative to quantum. And so this is an interesting one. So, we've been told for lots of years how secure, we have, an amazing number of bits in all of our encryption algorithms. And we've been told, as the meme goes, you versus the guy she told you not to worry about. Well, the guy she told you not to worry about, unfortunately, is coming now. And so no one knows exactly when a quantum computer will be powerful enough to decrypt all of those algorithms that we're using today, but it's coming. You see a lot of talk about 2030, roughly, but that 2030 date is based on companies that are collaborating. So, IBM has quantum, Google has quantum, lots of people have quantum computers that are building it for industry, but we know that there are likely bad actors, state-sponsored actors. China, the CCP, likely has quantum, and we don't know how far along theirs is. So do we have until 2030, or do we have until next week? and we don't know. And so this is something that the sooner you think about that and start to put your plan in place to become quantum safe, the better you'll be. I know we've been working with AWS to understand what their quantum capabilities are. There are algorithms that you can already use with your AWS workload. It's in testing today, but if you go into encryption, you can pick those and put them in your test environment and see how they work. And the plan is for those to be more in production in 2024. So coming well ahead of the 2030 date. And so this is certainly one. It's a unique one. And one of the things about risk that is kind of fascinating is risk is always a point in time. And so if you have a risk register that's very stale, it's not a good thing. And you should reassess those. And quantum is a great example of why that there will be some day, and we don't know when it is, where you are virtually safe, and the next day you will be completely exposed, and it's impossible to know when that day is coming. And so it's a really interesting use case of why risk over time changes. The other thing about quantum that's interesting is future hacks aren't the only thing to be concerned about. I think the most fascinating part, maybe the scariest part about it, is a breach that happened 5 years ago, where somebody took your data and it was encrypted. So you said, oh, thank God I encrypted it. They took it, but they can't do anything with it. Well, when the quantum computers allow them to break that algorithm, or that encryption, I'm sorry, that will all of a sudden be exposed. So some things it doesn't matter because that data may be less valuable over time, but there may be things like government secrets that have a very long shelf life that could be very useful. And so that to me is probably the scariest part about quantum is things that have already left the building that all of a sudden become very valuable to the bad guys. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to William for the next step of our protect.
Thanks. So zero trust. So when we were looking at the portfolio and the towers, we moved from the security assurance to the zero trust piece. So while I'm championing the security operations and response tower, very much in tune with the other tower that's right next to me in Kyndryl. And so I think it's always an interesting dialogue and conversation because I think that mimics also kind of what we need to do when we are looking at emerging threats and also looking at our portfolio is, okay, while we're doing incident response, while we're doing forensics, while we're looking at all of those analytics, what's going on with the proactive framework and security that we have? And so at Kyndryl, absolutely have the offering and the intent to say this is absolutely priority when you're trying to look at what is my security strategy, is to say let's go a couple steps backwards and let's look at our zero trust framework because it has those components on what technologies are we using. So here's an example. So in security operation response, when we talk about typical alerting inside the SOC, like EDR or SIM or vulnerability management or SOAR, and also identity and access management technologies where we can kind of see our identities moving back and forth, and also CMDB and asset identification. To have those in two towers are fantastic, but there needs to be an interlock in an organization exactly like that, same way. So in order for us to get better for the emerging threats and respond, there are some back-end information, things that feed that will always continue to either create a gap or create an additional risk in order for us to close that. And so, again, Kyndryl, the zero trust methodology, as far as the implement, it is a phased approach. Identify what is most important, looking at what are our processes, what are our technologies that we're using in order to select, if you will, based on what we're trying to do, and then you select those technologies in order to feed that. So it's not in reverse. I think many folks say, well, zero trust. Why don't I just go select the tools and then I'm good to go? Well, it's absolutely the opposite way of doing that. And in fact, when we do our offerings in our portfolio, we are not technology focused. We are objective, outcome-based focused. And then we meet our client in their journey. So this is no different, and this is how we frame our entire portfolio. I think when we have those implement zero trust pieces, then you start to say, and then we'll talk about it in recovery as well, is what is most important to the organization. Once again, we get into this rhythm, let's just put this in, let's get incident responders behind that, let's get recovery elements behind that without any type of consideration with what is the most important thing. So you would think that, isn't that pretty easy? If you focus on that as your priority in your first step, absolutely it does become easier in your other second, third, fourth, security strategies, but it's something that has to be done in advance. Make sure you get visibility. So the adoption framework, again, have a step process to kind of move through this. And you'll kind of see, we're not even talking about technology up in that beginning. We're talking about that cultural adoption, okay? What are we really trying to achieve? Do we really understand the framework? Do we really understand what we're doing in our business? So once we have a solid lock on that first step, then you can start to begin to move through those other steps in that framework. And so this is where Kyndryl can not only help kind of in that consultative, that advisory, saying this is what a process looks like. We can help you through that. And then we can also help identify what the technologies would be behind that in a roadmap. And then you start to get into that technology acceleration. So we all know in the industry is like, let's get a tool in. Let's get it running. We're good to go. Sure. And then you get into discussions where you've had something for 18 months and you're still asking your question, man, am I really getting the optimized benefit of that tool in the organization? And trust me, it's not of malice. It's either because we have so many competing priorities, we have so many different projects that are going on. How do you get into that cycle of optimization? But you do need to kind of get into that move phase of that technology acceleration and saying, are we getting the best of what we need? And we'll tell you, I'm going to get long-winded again here. So just in Kyndryl, we absolutely understand where we need to keep up with where the market is going, and the technologies are signaling this as well. So you'll start to see things like vulnerability management used to be on its own. Now it's VMDR. You'll start to see platforms and technologies saying we used to do one thing, now they're adding one to the next, or they're adding platform. So they're signaling the same exact thing, a comprehensive ecosystem in order for us to mature and stay in tune with the emerging threats that are coming in. We'll see a little bit more on that when we talk about the next phase. The next one is focused defense of the digital assets. Now we're kind of like looking at what is the most important thing? Am I looking at the entire surface, attack surface that we're looking at? Am I getting that full picture? Am I closing that gap? And then we'll start to get in that zero trust enablement. And now we're saying, okay, how do we govern it? Are we still continuing to mature this program and not saying we got zero trust all done, we got all our technologies done, 12 months we're done? Nope, you still need the governance to kind of go along with that and continue maturity. You get the fun block.
I do indeed. So I'm stealing William's thunder here. He's the offering manager in the space that I'm about to talk about, and so it just worked out this way. So I take a little bit of pride in this.
That's a good one.
So we're going to talk about withstand now, and particularly with the emerging threats that we talked about. So the first thing I want to introduce you to is Kyndryl Bridge. So this is our open integration platform, and it integrates everything from the customer to our back end. And so as a customer, you can come to Kyndryl Bridge and you can provision services. You can see what our catalog is, what's available there. There are things like an example I'll show you in a couple of slides where you can come through the Bridge console and consume the content from our services through Kyndryl Bridge. And so it's an externally facing thing. It also is a hybrid multi-cloud environment where we integrate from a technology standpoint internally. And so we have instances in various places in the globe so that we can handle things like residency requirements for data. We can do redundancy. We can make sure that we meet regulatory requirements, whatever the case may be. The back end has all of that using the right technology for you. As I open the session with our partnership across multiple vendors, that takes place in Kyndryl Bridge as well. And so whatever the right combination of technology that helps you solve your business problem, that's what we're able to integrate on the back end with Kyndryl Bridge. And so you can see some of the advantages here that it brings, observability, intelligence, operability, acceleration, so on and so forth. It's the foundation of everything you're going to see. And so let me give you an example of how that works in a security context with an offering that we're calling Threat Insights. And so this is a very much simplified architecture diagram as to how Threat Insights works. It's built upon Amazon Security Lake. that many of you are familiar with. It was had its general availability launch around Reinforce in the summer, and so it's a relatively new offering from AWS, and one that we're really excited about. And so what's not shown here, just in case you're not familiar with Security Lake, it takes various data tools that you may have in your environment, brings that data together through the Open Cybersecurity Schema framework, so all the data is normalized, and flows into Security Lake, so it's stored in one place where you can do various things with it. We would like to partner with you to help inform some of those things that you can do with it. And so what we're doing is connecting to customers' Amazon Security Lakes. We are bringing a subset of that data out into Kyndryl Bridge. We're going to tokenize it so that we're not seeing IP addresses, email addresses, personally identifiable information, anything like that. And then we're going to have a corpus and something that really is a distinct advantage that Kyndryl has. So we're going to enrich that data with things like threat intelligence. We're going to enrich it with things like exploitable vulnerability data. But then within the corpus, we will have hundreds, thousands of customers potentially, where we can see trends cross industry, cross geography, in ways that companies with smaller scales can't. That data is all protected based on, again, it's been tokenized, so it's not your sensitive data. It's tokenized before it's combined there, but then you'll be able to see those things that are very unique to Kyndryl's size and scale. And so what we're doing then is going to do two things with that. We're going to be a producer of findings for Security Lake. And so just like CrowdStrike, for example, is another one of the partners that uses OCSF and puts data into Security Lake, we will have findings based on algorithms that we're creating that will go back into the customer's Security Lake. So we're both a consumer of the Security Lake data and a producer where it goes back. And the reason we chose to do that is we think that a large percentage of our customers want their security operations center and their analysts to use a single pane of glass. So if you have a SIEM today where you consume all of the data out of your Security Lake, we'll be a producer, put the data back into Security Lake so that your analysts can get it in that single pane of glass. We're not asking them to go to another place. On the other hand, if you're a leader in your organization, maybe a CISO, maybe a SOC manager, those types of leaders, we're going to give you insights that are available through the Bridge console where you can see a summary of things that we've sent back to your security analyst via Amazon Security Lake, as well as more information about your environment, where you stand, where your disposition is, and things like that. And so there's two outcomes. There's the actionable findings that go back to your analysts, and there are the insights that keep the leadership informed of what's going on. And again, all of this integrates through OCSF, through Security Lake, with any tooling that you've already invested in. We're not competing with that, we're simply adding on to it. And that's true of the algorithms we're doing too. So you may have an EDR tool today that is exceptional at doing real-time detection of anomalies. And so we're not going to try to do real-time anomaly detection in EDR. What we're going to look for is what's something that may be in attack surface management and EDR, but if you look at either one individually, it falls through the cracks. But we'll be able to see across that portfolio, and so we can find things that show up in between those cracks and highlight them to you. Similarly, maybe even within, and I'll keep picking on EDR, they're looking at real time. One of the things that we want to look at are things that are a little bit more of a slow burn, where something is starting to occur, but you can't see it in real time. And so we think there's some blind spots that we're trying to fill in. And so the idea is not to compete with investments you've already made. It's to add incremental value and really close those visibility holes that you have today so you get a complete picture as to what your security environment looks like, again, for your CISO, for your SOC manager, and for your SOC analysts. And then this is we've got a really extensive portfolio of offerings, but this one fits well with a couple of the other ones. So we can manage your SOC for you, if you would prefer. That's something we have skill in that area. We can do it in many places around the world. We can also manage your security platform. So the tools that I mentioned, like EDR and ASM and SIEM, SOAR, those kinds of things, we can host those for you. We can manage those tools for you. And then we can also do the threat insights that we just talked about. The nice thing about this is any one of those that's of interest to you, we're able to do. We can add value individually. We can add incremental value if you choose to go with two of those three, and we can add the most value if you do all three. And so you can kind of see, the left-hand side here, you're managing everything, and you're just using our threat insights on top of that. And that's fine. We can add value that way. On the right-hand side, we're hosting your tools, but you're running your own SOC. And that's fine. That there are certainly customers that prefer that. They want to own the people that are doing the analysis. And then in the bottom one, Kyndryl is your full service managed service provider. We're running your SOC, we're hosting your tools, and we're integrating with the Amazon Security Lake and giving you threat insights. So soup to nuts in terms of your security operations center, we're running that for you. So again, any one, any two, or all three, we're able to help you with that. In addition, this is a very small subset that happened to go well together on a slide. We've got a very robust portfolio of offerings that all fit into this, which is only half of the boom. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to William, who's going to talk about the other side with resiliency and how we recover.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. So before I get, because this is the fun one, before I kind of move to the next thing, I wanted to make kind of two pieces of awareness real quick. So, we talked about OCSF, and so for folks that are not familiar with that, you're probably saying, okay, first of all, what is this? We're not going to go in a deep dive of what that framework is and kind of the components and the areas, but I just kind of want to say, right now, there is about 110 ISVs, security companies that we are typically familiar with in industry that are already subscribed to this model. I think that's number one. So this is something that is not, okay, is there one? Is there two? Is there three? No. There's about 110 already subscribing and formatting themselves in order to accommodate an OCSF framework. Number two, another reason that this is important, and I want to make the distinction before we move to the next slide, is while you see these are our initial use cases, because you're probably thinking, okay, William, you talked about resiliency, you talked about many things in your portfolio, you talked about zero trust. What about these other technologies and insights or information you might be receiving? So this is just the beginning of our journey in order to give additional use cases, personas, additional value to an organization. So these core pieces are just where we feel that we need to start, which is what is expected from the security strategy and posture. These are typically the blocking and tackling technologies that we're going to start with. And say, if you're going to go do this, would it be these? We're saying, absolutely, it would be in this space. And so where we're going to go from here is we will start to look at additional personas. We're starting with the CISO and the security analyst level in order to be able to have the risk management conversation and the security analyst tactical day-to-day conversation. But we're going to keep jumping from that because they're based on the OCSF data that you receive. There is asset data. There's compliance type data. It will just keep on going and adding additional value. So we won't have to vacate that framework. This will still keep on help us feed into other components that it's important to the organization. So we wanted to call that out. And so now I should probably go to the next slide before I keep going. But this is the fun topic. And actually, when we're done, if you just want to scoot around the hallway, we can give you a deep dive on what we're talking about here, if you have time. Okay, so recover quickly from unplanned outages. This is the recovery portion of the portfolio that we have on the right side. And so while we're, again, not here with the education piece, we're just here to reiterate that when we talk about security, we talk about recovery in the same conversation, we talk about resiliency in the same conversation. So it's very much a part of how we look at the areas. And the very first piece is, hey, before we start to do recovery, before we really start to put together some type of recovery plan, disaster recovery plan, business continuity plan, IT continuity area sustainment plan, there really is a core piece that we really need to start. And it's really no different than the IT security side of the house. Is, do I know where all my assets are? Do I know what the priority is? And what is the linkage to the major business objectives? What is going to stop my financial pipeline coming in for my specific business? What is going to stop the train in its tracks? That's where you got to start first, is understanding what are those systems, how are they tied to how we do our business. Once you prioritize that, then you can begin to start to say, okay, what's that recovery plan? How can Kyndryl help, and how can the other towers help me with being able to make sure we sustain those operations, and if something does happen, to get up within those tolerance levels that have been established at the beginning. Whoops. That's my first accident. So I guess developing a minimal, viable company, again, what is the basic roots that drives our core business. Again, everything that we do in our business is important, but there is a core set that really says, listen, if this happens, we've got to get into action, and we've got to do it immediately, very quickly, and have those assets ready. And so, again, kind of that's not going all the way down through these, but starting to prioritize the business processes, mapping them to the applications. Again, this is the same type of exercise like that you kind of talk about with asset identification, CMDB types of activities, which is not easy to do, but it is something that you really do need to return back to in order to establish a minimum viable company, and kind of that identification that's very key. Before we go to the next slide, I do want to state that in reiterating that when we said we were going to build a security practice from the ground up, once again, it's not technology focused. Once again, it is not just, hey, managing these services. It's being able to say, listen, we understand the demand of really understanding what is our strategy, because it drives everything and it increases confidence and reduces risk in the portfolio. So just kind of want to say that, before we move, or before Dan kind of gets up here, is that when we built our portfolio, that's what we're able to do, is have that honest conversation and build that trusted relationship in order to kind of discuss our resiliency framework and try to get ahead of emerging threats. So it goes hand in hand.
All right, so we're going to wrap up talking about the transition to an integrated security approach. And so I'm going to jump here and not take you through all 9 of these steps, but these are certainly things that we recommend you do in order to improve your security posture. How we can help you with this is across really 3 different initiatives and pieces of technology that we have in Kyndryl. The first I talked a little bit about earlier with Kyndryl Bridge, our open integration platform. That's the technology that underpins everything that we're talking about today. The second, we hinted at this a little bit, but it really applies to this slide, is we have a robust organization in Kyndryl Consult. And so they're able to come in and help you figure out where you are today, figure out where you want to be tomorrow, draw a roadmap how you can get there. You may have done some of these, most of these, none of these, whatever the case may be. We can help you to plan and then execute that plan to close these gaps. And then the last one that we haven't mentioned is one that I think fits in well with our Threat Insights offering that William and I have talked about. We have a design-based process called Kyndryl Vital. And so what we would love to do with Threat Insights is to find customer partners to help us co-develop and prioritize the things that we're looking at. And so there are lots of different security tools out there, and every customer has a different combination. And so in order to cover all of those and figure out what's important to individual customers, we'd love to have you come and join us in a Vital design session and say, here are our priorities. How can you address these in Threat Insights in such a way that you're able to really tailor that for your environment? And so really built on Kyndryl Bridge, informed by Kyndryl Consult, and in co-development with Kyndryl Vital, we think really we can improve and integrate your security, your resiliency, end-to-end cyber resiliency, and ultimately reduce your IT risk, which you should quantify, by the way. Let me move it on. In case you'd like to find us, we'll give you a few options here. So you're welcome to contact either William or me via the information that's on the screen now. We encourage you to fill out the survey and provide feedback to AWS about the session. And as you exit, our Experience Center is in Bellini 2002, just a couple of doors down. And so if you'd like to come have a more personal conversation or maybe ask a more detailed technical question, whatever the case may be, we'll head there as soon as we wrap up here.